Sometimes the people who fail the tests are exactly the ones you need when everything falls apart. When explosions shook the ground and bullets flew overhead, nobody cared about perfect push-ups or flawless marching drills. They only cared about one thing: who would run toward the danger when everyone else was running away. Sarah Martinez never wanted to be a soldier. Growing up as the daughter of General Robert Martinez, one of the most decorated officers in the United States Army, she had seen enough of military life to know it wasn't for her. While other kids played with dolls or video games, Sarah watched her father leave for deployments that stretched for months. She saw her mother cry quietly in the kitchen when she thought nobody was looking. She felt the weight of expectations that came with carrying the Martinez name. The general was a legend. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism. His men called him Iron Rob because nothing seemed to break him. He could march 20 miles with a full pack, shoot expert with any weapon, and make split-second decisions that saved lives. Everyone expected his daughter to follow in his footsteps naturally. But Sarah was different. Where her father was disciplined, she was creative. Where he was structured, she preferred freedom. While he could disassemble and reassemble an M4 rifle in under 2 minutes, Sarah could paint landscapes that made people stop and stare. She dreamed of art school, maybe traveling to Europe to study the masters. The last thing she wanted was to wear camouflage and take orders. The pressure started early. At family gatherings, relatives would pat her shoulder and say things like, "Following Daddy's footsteps, I bet," or "Can't wait to see you in uniform." Sarah would smile politely and change the subject, but inside she felt trapped. Even her high school guidance counselor assumed she'd apply to West Point or join ROTC. Her father never directly pushed her toward the military, but Sarah felt his disappointment whenever she talked about art or civilian colleges. During dinner conversations about current events or military history, he would light up discussing tactics and leadership, clearly hoping she would show interest. When she didn't, his enthusiasm would fade, replaced by polite but distant responses to her talk about paintings or exhibitions. The breaking point came during her senior year of high school. Sarah had been accepted to several art programs, including her dream school in California. She was excited to finally tell her parents about her plans over dinner. But before she could speak, her father made an announcement that changed everything. "Sarah, I've been thinking about your future," General Martinez said, setting down his fork. "I know you haven't decided on college yet, but I want you to consider something special. I've arranged for you to visit Fort Bragg next month. Colonel Thompson, an old friend of mine, runs an excellent training program for officer candidates. It would give you a real taste of military life before making any commitments." Sarah's mother, Elena, looked uncomfortable. She knew about Sarah's art school acceptance letters hidden in her daughter's bedroom. "Robert, maybe we should discuss this as a family first," she said gently. "There's nothing to discuss," the general replied. "This is an incredible opportunity. Most kids would kill for a chance like this. Sarah has military leadership in her blood. She just needs the right environment to discover it." That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. She had tried so many times to tell her father about her dreams, but the words never came out right. How do you tell a war hero that you'd rather paint flowers than fire weapons? How do you explain that you want to create beauty instead of learning to destroy? 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself at Fort Bragg, wearing borrowed fatigues that didn't quite fit. The program was designed for high school students considering military careers, but Sarah felt like an imposter from the moment she arrived. The other participants seemed eager and confident, discussing their ROTC experience and their plans for military academies. Sarah nodded along, but her heart wasn't in it. The first day included a tour of the facilities, briefings on military history, and basic physical fitness tests. Sarah struggled through push-ups, barely managing 8 when the standard was 25. During the mile run, she finished dead last, gasping for breath while others looked like they had barely broken a sweat. The drill instructor, Sergeant Martinez, no relation, made a note on his clipboard and shook his head. "Martinez. You related to Iron Rob Martinez?" he called out. "Yes, Sergeant." "He's my father," Sarah replied, still catching her breath. Sergeant Martinez looked surprised, then disappointed. Well, I'll be damned. Guess the apple fell pretty far from the tree on this one. The word stung more than Sarah expected. She had always known she wasn't like her father, but hearing it said out loud by someone who clearly respected him made her feel smaller than ever. The weapons training was even worse. While other students handled rifles with confidence, Sarah fumbled with the safety mechanism and flinched every time someone fired near her. Her hands shook as she tried to load magazines, and she couldn't hit a target from 25 yards even with multiple attempts. The instructor, a patient staff sergeant named Johnson, tried to help her, but Sarah could see the frustration in his eyes. "It's okay, miss. Not everyone's a natural shooter," he said kindly, but Sarah heard the unspoken words, especially not someone whose father was a legendary marksman. The tactical exercises were the final humiliation. The group was divided into squads and given simulated missions to complete. Sarah found herself paralyzed by indecision when her team leader asked her to choose between two routes on a map. She knew the right answer was in there somewhere, but, under pressure, her mind went blank. Her squad completed their mission last, and Sarah felt responsible for holding everyone back. That evening, participants were allowed to call home. Sarah almost didn't dial, but she needed to hear a familiar voice. Her father answered on the second ring. "How's it going, sweetheart?" "Colonel Thompson called and said you arrived safely." "Are you learning a lot?" Sarah wanted to tell him everything. How she felt lost and overwhelmed, how the other kids seemed to belong in ways she never would, how she missed her art supplies and the quiet of her bedroom studio. Instead, she heard herself saying, "It's fine, Dad." Really educational. "That's my girl. I knew you'd do great once you gave it a real chance. Colonel Thompson is one of the finest officers I've ever served with. Whatever he teaches you, pay attention. These experiences will shape who you become." After hanging up, Sarah sat on her narrow bunk and pulled out the small sketchbook she had smuggled in her bag. She drew the barracks around her, trying to capture the harsh fluorescent lighting and the way her fellow participants cleaned their equipment with practiced efficiency. Drawing always calmed her, but tonight it only reminded her how out of place she was. The second day brought more challenges. Combat first aid training revealed that Sarah had a weak stomach for blood, even fake blood from training mannequins. While others confidently practiced bandaging techniques and casualty evacuation procedures, Sarah had to step outside twice to avoid being sick. The medic instructor, a kind woman named Sergeant Lewis, tried to encourage her. "It's normal to be squeamish at first," she said. "But, in the military, these skills can save lives. Your buddies will depend on you knowing this stuff." Sarah nodded and tried again, but her hands continued to shake as she attempted to start in 4 on a practice arm. She knew her father had saved wounded soldiers in combat, performing medical procedures under enemy fire. The contrast between his capability and her struggles felt insurmountable. Leadership exercises proved equally challenging. When tasked with planning and executing a squad movement across an obstacle course, Sarah's natural inclination was to ask for everyone's input and try to build consensus. But military leadership demanded quick decisions and clear commands. Her hesitation cost her team precious time, and they finished behind squads led by more decisive participants. "Martinez, you need to trust your instincts and commit to your decisions," called out Captain Rodriguez, the officer overseeing the exercise. "Indecision gets people killed in real combat situations." Sarah knew he was right, but her instincts told her to consider multiple perspectives and look for creative solutions. The military way of rapid decision-making felt foreign and uncomfortable. She began to wonder if there was something fundamentally wrong with her approach to problem-solving. The lowest point came during a night navigation exercise. Armed with only a compass and a map, pairs of students had to find their way to several checkpoints in the dark. Sarah was partnered with Jake Morrison, a confident young man who had already committed to West Point. Jake clearly viewed the exercise as an opportunity to demonstrate his leadership skills. "I'll handle the navigation," he announced as they set out. "Just try to keep up and don't slow us down." Sarah wanted to contribute, but Jake's dismissive attitude made her doubt herself even more. When they reached what should have been their second checkpoint and found nothing, Sarah quietly suggested they might have made a wrong turn. Jake brushed off her concern and pushed forward, confident in his navigation skills. 2 hours later, they were completely lost. Jake's confidence had evaporated, and he began to panic as other teams radioed in successful checkpoint completions. Sarah pulled out her compass and map, studying them carefully in the red light of her flashlight. She had always been good at spatial relationships and patterns, skills she used in her artwork. "I think we need to backtrack to that creek we crossed," she said softly. "If we follow it southeast, it should lead us to checkpoint 3. Jake was too frustrated to argue anymore. They backtracked to the creek and followed Sarah's suggested route. 30 minutes later, they found checkpoint 3, then successfully navigated to the remaining checkpoints. They finished the exercise successfully, though later than most other teams. Despite contributing to their eventual success, Sarah felt like a failure. She had been passive for most of the exercise, only stepping up when Jake's plan failed completely. A real leader would have been confident from the start, she thought. Her father would have taken charge immediately and led them to success without getting lost in the first place. The final day included individual counseling sessions with the instructors. Sarah sat nervously in Colonel Thompson's office, surrounded by military awards and photos of soldiers in action. The colonel was a tall, stern-looking man with gray hair and intense eyes. Sarah knew he was evaluating her potential and preparing to give feedback that would likely confirm what she already knew: she wasn't military material. "Martinez, I've reviewed your performance over the past 3 days," Colonel Thompson began, consulting a file on his desk. "I have to be honest with you. This program has highlighted some significant challenges in your military readiness." Sarah nodded, trying to prepare herself for the disappointment she would see in her father's eyes when she returned home. "Your physical fitness scores are well below military standards. Your weapons handling shows inexperience and hesitation. Your leadership style is too collaborative for military decision-making environments. And your performance in high-pressure situations suggests you might struggle with the demands of military service." Each criticism felt like a hammer blow. Sarah had known she was failing, but hearing it laid out so systematically was crushing. However, Colonel Thompson continued, "I did notice some interesting qualities. Sergeant Lewis mentioned that once you overcame your initial reaction, you showed genuine compassion and care for the training casualties. Captain Rodriguez noted that your tactical suggestions, when you made them, were often creative and sound. And your navigation skills during the night exercise were actually quite impressive once you gained confidence." Sarah looked up, surprised by the unexpected praise. "The military needs different types of people, Martinez. Not everyone can be a frontline infantry officer like your father. There are roles for support specialists, medical personnel, intelligence analysts, and logistics coordinators. People who think differently and bring unique perspectives to complex problems." Colonel Thompson leaned back in his chair. "But I have to ask you directly, do you want to be here? Because everything I've observed suggests that your heart isn't in military service. You can have all the potential in the world, but without genuine motivation and commitment, you'll never succeed in this environment." It was the question Sarah had been dreading, but also the one she most needed to answer honestly. She thought about her art supplies waiting at home, her acceptance letters to civilian colleges, and her dreams of studying in Europe. Then, she thought about her father's expectations and her family's military tradition. "Sir, I'm not sure," she said quietly. "I want to make my father proud, but I don't think the military is where I belong. I have other interests and different strengths that might not fit well with military service." Colonel Thompson nodded slowly. "That's an honest answer, and I respect that. It takes courage to admit when something isn't right for you, especially when there are family expectations involved. Have you discussed this with your father?" "Not really, sir. He's so proud of his military service, and he's always talked about leadership and duty and serving something bigger than yourself. I don't think he'd understand why I'd want to do something else." "Your father is a fine officer and a good man," Colonel Thompson said. "He wants what's best for you, but he might not realize that what's best might not be the military. Sometimes parents project their own paths onto their children without meaning to. As the conversation continued, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in months, someone was acknowledging that it was okay for her to have different dreams and different strengths. Colonel Thompson wasn't telling her she was a failure, he was telling her she might be successful in a different environment. The bus ride home gave Sarah time to think about how to approach the conversation with her father. She had learned things about herself during those 3 days, not all of them negative. She discovered she could push through physical discomfort when necessary, she could contribute to team success when given the chance, and she could navigate complex situations when she trusted her instincts. But she had also confirmed what she had always suspected: her strengths lay in different areas than traditional military skills. She was better at building consensus than giving orders, better at creative problem solving than following rigid protocols, better at understanding people's emotions than suppressing her own. When the bus pulled up to the pickup point, Sarah saw her father waiting by his car, dressed in civilian clothes but still somehow looking military in his bearing. She gathered her borrowed equipment and prepared for what might be the most important conversation of her life. "How did it go?" General Martinez asked as they drove home. "Colonel Thompson said you completed all the exercises." "I'm proud of you for sticking with it." Sarah took a deep breath. It was time to be honest, not just with her father, but with herself. The conversation that followed would change everything, but she was finally ready to have it. She had learned that failing at something doesn't make you a failure as a person. Sometimes it just means you're meant for something different. The conversation Sarah had dreaded for so long happened that evening over dinner. She had rehearsed different versions in her head during the drive home, but when the moment came, the words tumbled out messily and honestly. "Dad, I need to tell you something about the program at Fort Bragg. And about what I want to do with my life." General Martinez looked up from his plate, immediately sensing the seriousness in his daughter's voice. Elena, Sarah's mother, set down her fork and gave Sarah an encouraging nod. "I'm not cut out for military service," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I tried, I really did, but I failed at almost everything. I can't do enough push-ups, I can't shoot straight, and I freeze up when people expect me to make quick decisions." Colonel Thompson was very kind about it, but the message was clear: I don't have what it takes. Her father's face remained neutral, but Sarah could see disappointment flickering in his eyes. She pressed on before he could respond. "But more than that, Dad, it's not what I want. I know you're proud of your service, and I'm proud of you too. What you've accomplished, the people you've saved, the leadership you've shown, it's incredible. But it's not me. I want to go to art school. I want to study painting and maybe travel and create things that make people feel something beautiful. I know that might not seem as important as what you do, but it's what makes me feel alive." The silence stretched uncomfortably. General Martinez stared at his plate, processing what he had heard. Elena reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand supportively. Finally, her father looked up. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. I never meant to pressure you into military service. When I arranged the Fort Bragg visit, I thought you were just uncertain about your future, like a lot of kids your age. I thought maybe you needed exposure to see if military life might appeal to you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've spent my career around people who found their calling in service. It's a good life, but it's not the only good life. If art is your calling, then that's what you should pursue." Sarah felt tears of relief welling up. "Really? You're not disappointed?" "Disappointed? Sarah, I'm proud of you for being honest with me and with yourself. It takes courage to admit when something isn't right for you, especially when you feel family pressure. That kind of self-awareness and integrity, those are military values too, even if you're not serving in uniform." Elena smiled and wiped her own eyes. "Your father and I just want you to be happy and fulfilled. If that means art school, then we'll support you completely." That fall, Sarah enrolled in the California Institute of the Arts. The adjustment from small military town to creative campus was dramatic but exhilarating. She threw herself into painting, drawing, and art history classes. Her professors recognized her talent and dedication, and, for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She made friends with other artists who understood her passion for creating. She spent hours in the studio, losing track of time as she worked on canvases that expressed emotions she had never been able to put into words. Her landscapes evolved from pretty pictures into complex explorations of light, shadow, and feeling. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. During Sarah's junior year, she received a call that changed everything. There had been a massive earthquake in Haiti, followed by a devastating tsunami that had destroyed entire coastal communities. International relief organizations were mobilizing, but the scope of the disaster was overwhelming local response capabilities. Elena, who had been watching the news coverage, called Sarah with an idea. "Honey, I know this might sound crazy, but I've been thinking about Haiti. You have spring break coming up, and there are volunteer organizations looking for help with relief efforts. I know you're not military, but you have other skills. You could help document what's happening, maybe paint portraits of survivors or help with children's programs. Art can be healing too." The idea appealed to Sarah immediately. She had been looking for ways to make her art more meaningful, more connected to the real world. Several of her classmates were also interested in volunteer work, and they began researching organizations that could use their help. Sarah ended up joining a group called Artists for Aid, which paired creative professionals with disaster relief efforts. The organization believed that art therapy, documentation, and creative programming were essential parts of helping communities heal from trauma. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself on a plane to Port-au-Prince, carrying art supplies instead of weapons, ready to help in the only way she knew how. The devastation in Haiti was unlike anything Sarah had ever imagined. Entire neighborhoods had been flattened by the earthquake, and the tsunami had swept away coastal villages completely. Thousands of people were living in temporary shelters, having lost their homes, possessions, and often family members. Sarah's team was assigned to work at a large refugee camp outside the capital. Their job was to provide art therapy for traumatized children, help adults document their experiences through creative expression, and work with local artists to preserve cultural heritage that had been destroyed in the disaster. On her first day, Sarah felt overwhelmed and underprepared. The camp housed over 8,000 people in conditions that were heartbreaking. Children who had lost their parents wandered between tents. Adults sat in stunned silence, staring at nothing. The medical staff was doing heroic work, but there weren't enough supplies, enough people, or enough hours in the day to address everyone's needs. "What am I doing here?" Sarah thought to herself as she unpacked her art supplies in the tent that would serve as her workspace. These people need food, medicine, and shelter. How is finger painting going to help anyone? Her doubt was interrupted by a small voice behind her. "Excuse me, miss. Are you the art teacher?" Sarah turned to see a girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, wearing a dirty dress and clutching a torn stuffed animal. Despite the circumstances, her eyes were bright with curiosity. "Yes, I am," Sarah replied, crouching down to the girl's level. "What's your name?" "Marie. My mama said maybe you could teach me to draw. I used to draw all the time, but I lost my pencils in the earthquake." Sarah felt her heart breaking and mending at the same time. "I would love to teach you to draw, Marie. I have lots of pencils and paper. Would you like to start right now?" That first session with Marie opened Sarah's eyes to something she had never fully understood before. As the little girl carefully drew her family's house, the one that had been destroyed, she began talking about her experiences in a way that she hadn't been able to do with the camp counselors or medical staff. The act of creating something gave her a way to process emotions too big for words. Within days, Sarah's tent was full of children and adults who found solace in creative expression. She taught basic drawing techniques, but, more importantly, she listened as people shared their stories through art. She helped elderly residents paint memories of their destroyed communities, preserving cultural heritage in the only way possible when physical landmarks were gone. One afternoon, a commotion outside the tent caught Sarah's attention. She could hear shouting and what sounded like vehicles approaching rapidly. She stepped outside and saw military trucks entering the camp, followed by several people in civilian clothes who were clearly journalists. The camp coordinator, a tired-looking woman named Dr. Patricia Williams, was arguing with someone who appeared to be in charge of the new arrivals.
"You can't just show up here without coordination," Dr. Williams was saying.
"We have protocols and systems in place. This camp is already overcrowded, and we can't handle a massive influx of new people without proper preparation." The military officer, a colonel whose uniform indicated he was with the United Nations peacekeeping force, looked frustrated. "Ma'am, we have 3 more camps that have been completely overwhelmed by recent aftershocks. We have over 2,000 people who need immediate shelter and medical attention. This is the only facility in the region with capacity." Sarah watched the argument with growing concern. She could see both sides of the problem. Dr. Williams was right that the camp was already stretched beyond its limits, but the colonel was right that people desperately needed help. As they argued, she noticed that families from the new arrivals were standing in the hot sun with their few possessions, including many children who looked exhausted and frightened. Without really thinking about what she was doing, Sarah walked over to the group of new arrivals. "Hi everyone," she said in her basic French, hoping they could understand. "I know this is confusing and scary right now. The grown-ups are working out where everyone will stay. While we wait, would any of the kids like to do some drawing? I have paper and crayons in my tent." Several children looked interested, but they stayed close to their parents, uncertain about this stranger. Sarah tried a different approach. She sat down right there in the dirt and pulled out a small sketchbook from her pocket. She began drawing the scene around her, the tents, the people waiting, even the heated discussion between Dr. Williams and the colonel. Curiosity won out over caution. First one child, then several others, came over to see what she was drawing. Soon she had a small crowd gathered around her, and she began handing out paper and crayons. The children's focus on drawing seemed to calm their parents as well, and the anxiety level of the group began to decrease. Dr. Williams noticed what was happening and walked over. "Thank you," she said quietly to Sarah. "That was good thinking. We'll get this sorted out, but it's going to take a few hours to figure out sleeping arrangements and meal distribution for everyone. Is there anything else I can do to help?" Sarah asked. Dr. Williams looked around at the organized chaos of the camp expansion. "Actually, yes. We're going to need to set up a registration system for all these new arrivals. We need to document who they are, where they came from, what medical needs they have, and try to reconnect families that might have been separated. It's a massive logistical challenge." Sarah thought about the organizational systems she had learned in her failed military training. She might not have been good at shooting or physical training, but she understood logistics and record-keeping. More importantly, her art background had taught her to pay attention to details and to see patterns that others might miss. "I could help with registration," she offered. "I'm good with organizing information, and I speak enough French to communicate with most people." Over the next several hours, Sarah found herself at the center of a massive humanitarian operation. Working with Dr. Williams and several other volunteers, she helped establish a systematic process for registering new arrivals, documenting their needs, and connecting them with appropriate services. Her artistic training proved unexpectedly valuable. She was skilled at observing people carefully, noticing details that others missed. When families reported missing relatives, Sarah could often provide detailed descriptions that helped reunite them. Her ability to organize visual information translated well to organizing data and logistics. As evening fell and the immediate crisis was under control, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She had handled complex logistics, managed stressful situations, and made decisions under pressure, all things she had failed at during military training. But, in this context, with people she cared about helping and problems she was motivated to solve, her capabilities had emerged naturally. Dr. Williams found her sitting outside her tent, sketching the camp by lamplight. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you for today. Your help with the registration process probably saved us 6 hours of confusion and chaos. Where did you learn to organize like that?" Sarah laughed. "Honestly, I'm not sure. I failed military training a few years ago because I couldn't handle the pressure and decision-making. But today felt different. I knew what needed to be done, and I just did it. Sometimes we rise to meet the challenges that matter to us, Dr. Williams observed. Military training is artificial pressure designed to prepare people for combat situations. Today was real pressure with real stakes and real people who needed help.
That can bring out different capabilities.
That night, Sarah lay awake in her small tent thinking about what had happened. She had always assumed that her failure in military training meant she couldn't handle high-pressure situations or make important decisions. But today had proved that assumption wrong. She could handle pressure and make decisions, but only when she was fighting for something she believed in, using skills that felt natural to her. The next few weeks in Haiti confirmed this realization. Sarah found herself taking on increasing responsibilities in the camp, not because anyone assigned them to her, but because she saw needs and stepped up to meet them. She organized supply distribution, coordinated between different volunteer groups, and even helped resolve conflicts between camp residents. Her artistic work continued as well, but it had evolved. Instead of just providing therapy and documentation, she began using art as a tool for problem-solving and communication. She created visual maps of the camp to help new arrivals navigate. She designed signs and information systems in multiple languages. She even painted murals that helped create a sense of community pride and hope in the temporary settlement. One evening, as Sarah was finishing a painting of the camp's children playing soccer, she received an unexpected visitor. A UN officer approached her workspace, and Sarah was surprised to recognize the colonel who had brought the refugee convoy several weeks earlier.
Ms. Martinez?
I'm Colonel Jean-Baptiste. I wanted to speak with you about some observations I've made regarding your work here. Sarah set down her paintbrush, curious but slightly nervous.
Of course, Colonel. Is there a problem? Quite the opposite.
Dr. Williams and several other camp coordinators have mentioned your contributions to our operations here. Your organizational skills, your ability to work with diverse groups of people, and your problem-solving capabilities have been impressive. But what really caught my attention is your unconventional approach to humanitarian work. He gestured to her latest painting, which showed camp residents working together to build a community garden. You use art not just as therapy, but as a tool for building community and solving practical problems.
That's innovative thinking.
Colonel Baptiste sat down on a folding chair near her easel.
I'm curious about your background.
Dr. Williams mentioned you failed military training, but what I've observed here suggests someone with natural leadership abilities and strong operational skills. Sarah found herself telling Colonel Baptiste about her experience at Fort Bragg, her struggles with traditional military expectations, and her journey to art school. She explained how she had always felt like a failure because she couldn't meet the standards that came naturally to people like her father. Interesting, Colonel Baptiste mused. You know, the military has evolved significantly in recent decades. We've learned that modern conflicts require diverse skill sets and different types of thinking. Humanitarian operations, peacekeeping missions, cultural liaison work, psychological operations, these all require people who can think creatively and work effectively with civilian populations.
He paused, seeming to consider something.
There are roles in today's military for people with your exact combination of skills. Art therapy specialists, cultural affairs officers, humanitarian assistance coordinators, civil affairs specialists. People who can bridge the gap between military operations and civilian communities.
Sarah shook her head.
Colonel, I appreciate that, but I tried military service once.
I failed at every basic requirement.
I couldn't handle the physical demands, the weapons training, the traditional leadership expectations.
But, could you handle this?
Colonel Baptiste gestured around the camp. Because what you've been doing here for the past month is exactly the kind of work that modern militaries need people to do. Humanitarian assistance and disaster relief are becoming major military missions. We need people who can work with refugees, coordinate with international organizations, and solve complex logistical problems in challenging environments. As Sarah considered his words, she realized that everything she had been doing in Haiti was, in fact, military-type work. She was managing logistics, coordinating operations, working under pressure, and making decisions that affected thousands of people. But, because she was motivated by humanitarian concerns rather than military objectives, and because she was using her natural skills rather than forcing herself into an artificial mold, she had been successful. Colonel Baptiste continued. The military I work for isn't the same as the one your father served in, and it's definitely not the same as what you experienced in that training program. We've learned that diversity of thought and background makes organizations stronger, not weaker. Someone with your artistic background and humanitarian instincts might be exactly what we need for certain missions. That night, Sarah called her parents for the first time since arriving in Haiti. She told them about her experiences, her growing confidence, and her unexpected conversation with Colonel Baptiste. "Sweetheart, you sound different," her mother said. "More sure of yourself. It sounds like you found something that really matters to you." Her father's voice was full of pride when he spoke. "Sarah, what you're doing down there is exactly the kind of work that makes a difference in the world. Whether it's military or civilian, you're serving something bigger than yourself. That's what matters most." As her time in Haiti drew to a close, Sarah faced a decision she had never expected to consider. She had proven to herself that she could handle pressure, make difficult decisions, and lead people effectively, but only when she was working toward goals she believed in, using skills that felt natural to her. Colonel Baptiste had given her information about several military programs that might be a good fit for her background and interests. There were opportunities in civil affairs, psychological operations, humanitarian assistance, and cultural liaison work. These roles required artistic and creative thinking, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to work with civilian populations, all strengths that Sarah possessed. But she also loved her art studies and had built a life in California that she valued. The question was whether there was a way to combine her artistic calling with meaningful service to others, or whether she would have to choose between them. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Williams approached her during her final week in Haiti with a proposition. "Sarah, I've been thinking about your future plans. You mentioned you have one more year of art school left, but I wonder if you'd be interested in a different path. There's a graduate program in art therapy and humanitarian studies that might be perfect for you. It combines clinical art therapy training with international development and disaster relief work. Graduates often work with organizations like Doctors Without Borders, the Red Cross, or UN humanitarian agencies." Dr. Williams handed her a brochure. "It would mean changing your plans, but it would allow you to combine your artistic talents with the kind of service work you've discovered you're good at. And it might prepare you for the kind of military roles Colonel Baptiste was describing, if that's something you decide to pursue later." Looking at the program description, Sarah felt the same excitement she had felt when first reading about art school. This felt like a path that honored both her creative nature and her newly discovered abilities in humanitarian work. But first, she had to finish her commitment in Haiti and return to California to complete her current degree. The experiences of the past months had taught her that the most important decisions shouldn't be rushed, even when you're excited about new possibilities. As her plane lifted off from Port-au-Prince, Sarah looked down at the camp where she had spent the most challenging and rewarding months of her life. She was returning to California with a completely different understanding of her own capabilities and a new sense of purpose. She had learned that failing at one thing doesn't define your potential for everything else, and that sometimes the most meaningful paths are ones you never expected to find. Sarah returned to California with a head full of ideas and a heart full of purpose, but the transition back to college life proved more difficult than she had expected. After months of working with people facing life and death situations, sitting in art history lectures felt almost trivial. Her classmates' concerns about gallery openings and graduate school applications seemed disconnected from the real world she had experienced in Haiti. She threw herself into her final year of coursework, but her art began to change dramatically. Instead of the peaceful landscapes and abstract compositions she had painted before, Sarah found herself creating powerful works that depicted human struggle and resilience. Her professors noticed the evolution immediately. "Sarah, your work has gained tremendous depth and emotional power," Professor Martinez, no relation, commented during a critique session. "There's an urgency and authenticity here that wasn't present in your earlier pieces. What happened to inspire this transformation?" Sarah shared some of her experiences in Haiti, and word spread quickly through the art department about her humanitarian work. She was invited to give presentations about art therapy and disaster relief, and several classmates expressed interest in similar volunteer opportunities. But even as Sarah gained recognition for her artistic growth, she felt pulled toward the graduate program Dr. Williams had suggested. She researched the art therapy and humanitarian studies program extensively and found herself increasingly excited about the possibility of combining clinical training with international service work. The decision became clearer when she received a call from Colonel Baptiste, who was now, "And if you ever decided you wanted to pursue military service directly, this background would make you an extremely competitive candidate for officer roles in civil affairs or psychological operations." The opportunity felt like everything Sarah had been searching for without knowing it. She would be able to honor her artistic calling while also serving others in meaningful ways. She wouldn't have to choose between creativity and service, she could combine them into something unique and powerful. After long conversations with her parents and professors, Sarah made the decision to apply for the graduate program and the civilian military training track. The applications were rigorous, requiring essays about her motivations, detailed descriptions of her Haiti experience, and interviews with both academic and military personnel. 8 months later, Sarah found herself at Georgetown University, beginning a graduate program unlike anything she had ever imagined. Her classmates included former Peace Corps volunteers, military veterans pursuing art therapy training, psychologists interested in international work, and artists who wanted to use their skills for humanitarian purposes. The coursework was demanding, covering clinical psychology, art therapy techniques, international development, conflict resolution, cultural competency, and humanitarian law. Sarah struggled at first with the academic psychology requirements, but her practical experience in Haiti gave her insights that many of her classmates lacked. The military training component was equally challenging but completely different from her experience at Fort Bragg years earlier. Instead of focusing on combat skills and traditional military discipline, this program emphasized cultural sensitivity, civilian-military cooperation, and the unique challenges of working in post-conflict environments. Sarah learned about the psychological impact of trauma on communities, the logistics of humanitarian operations, and the delicate balance required when military and civilian organizations work together. She studied case histories of successful humanitarian interventions and analyzed failures to understand what had gone wrong. Most importantly, she learned that her failure in traditional military training had not been a personal shortcoming but simply a mismatch between her skills and the requirements of that particular program. The new training emphasized exactly the qualities that Sarah possessed naturally: empathy, creativity, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to build trust with diverse populations. 18 months into the program, Sarah received her first field assignment. A massive earthquake had struck Nepal, and international relief organizations were mobilizing to provide assistance. Sarah would be part of a joint civilian-military team providing psychological support and community organization assistance to affected populations. This time, Sarah felt prepared and confident as she boarded the plane to Kathmandu. She carried professional art therapy supplies, spoke basic Nepali, and had extensive training in trauma psychology and humanitarian operations. She was no longer a well-meaning volunteer figuring things out as she went, she was a trained professional with specialized skills. The situation in Nepal was different from Haiti but equally challenging. The earthquake had struck a mountainous region where many communities were accessible only by helicopter or on foot. Traditional relief operations focused on providing immediate necessities like food, water, and medical care, but there was growing recognition that psychological support and community rebuilding were equally important for long-term recovery. Sarah was assigned to work in a remote valley where several villages had been completely destroyed. The survivors had been relocated to a temporary camp, but tensions were rising between different ethnic groups who had been forced to share limited resources. Local leaders were struggling to maintain order, and international aid workers were finding it difficult to work effectively with the community. Drawing on her training and experience, Sarah began by simply listening. She spent her first week walking through the camp with her art supplies, sitting with different groups, and sketching scenes of daily life. People were initially suspicious of this foreign woman with her strange materials, but curiosity gradually overcame caution. She started with children, as she had learned to do in Haiti. Art provided a universal language that transcended cultural and linguistic barriers. As kids gathered around her easel, adults began to watch and, eventually, participate. Sarah discovered that many of the camp residents had artistic traditions of their own, weaving, carving, and painting that had been part of their culture for generations but had been lost when their homes were destroyed. Instead of imposing her own artistic methods, Sarah began learning local techniques and helping people recreate traditional art forms using available materials. This approach accomplished several things simultaneously. It provided therapeutic benefits by helping people process their trauma, it preserved cultural heritage that was in danger of being lost, and it built bridges between different ethnic groups who shared similar artistic traditions despite other differences. The breakthrough came when Sarah proposed organizing a community art festival. Working with local leaders, she suggested that different groups could share their traditional arts with each other and with the aid workers who were trying to help them. The festival would celebrate what had not been lost while acknowledging what needed to be rebuilt. The military commander of the relief operation, Major Thompson, was initially skeptical. "We're here to provide emergency assistance and maintain security, not to organize cultural events. I'm not sure this is the best use of resources." But Sarah had learned how to communicate effectively with military personnel during her training. She prepared a detailed proposal showing how the festival would address specific operational challenges the relief effort was facing: low morale among aid workers, tensions between ethnic groups, lack of community cooperation with relief efforts, and problems with maintaining order in the camp. "Sir, we're not just organizing a party," Sarah explained during a briefing with the relief operation leadership. "We're using cultural programming to address psychological trauma, build social cohesion, and improve cooperation between the affected population and relief organizations. These are force multipliers for all our other efforts." She presented data from similar programs in other disaster zones, showing measurable improvements in community stability, mental health outcomes, and cooperation with relief efforts when cultural preservation was included in humanitarian operations. Major Thompson reviewed her proposal carefully. "Martinez, this is actually sophisticated psychological operations thinking. You're using cultural engagement as a tool for achieving operational objectives. That's exactly the kind of innovative approach we need in modern humanitarian work." The festival was approved and became a turning point for the entire relief operation. Different ethnic groups that had been suspicious of each other began sharing artistic techniques and cultural stories. Aid workers gained insights into local customs and values that improved their effectiveness. Community leaders found new ways to work together, and the general atmosphere of the camp shifted from despair and conflict to hope and cooperation. But the real test came when the festival was interrupted by a crisis that threatened everything they had built. 3 days into the event, a powerful aftershock struck the region. While not as devastating as the original earthquake, it caused a landslide that blocked the main road into the valley and damaged the helicopter. But she also knew that traditional military approaches to maintaining order, posting guards, implementing strict controls, and using authority to enforce compliance, would destroy all the trust and community building that had been accomplished. She requested a private meeting with Major Thompson. "Sir, I have an idea for addressing the supply crisis, but it's going to require us to do things differently than standard protocol." Major Thompson looked exhausted. "At this point, Martinez, I'm willing to listen to anything that might help." "What are you thinking?" Sarah spread out a map of the valley on the table. "The landslide blocked the main road, but there are several mountain trails that connect to villages outside this valley. Local people have been using these trails for trade and travel for hundreds of years. They know routes that aren't on any of our maps." She pointed to several locations. "If we can organize pack trains using local knowledge and local people, we might be able to bring in essential supplies even before the main road is cleared. But it would require trusting the community to organize and manage the operation themselves, rather than imposing military control. That's a significant risk," Major Thompson observed.
If we give them control over supply distribution, we lose our leverage for maintaining order. What if they decide to prioritize their own ethnic group over others? Sir, what if they don't? What if trusting them with responsibility actually gives them incentives to work together rather than fighting each other?
If different groups have to cooperate to organize the pack trains and manage distribution, they might solve the ethnic tensions themselves rather than us having to suppress them. Sarah pulled out her sketchbook and showed Major Thompson drawings she had made during the festival. These people aren't just disaster victims waiting for us to save them. They're experienced mountain communities who survived for generations before we got here. They have skills and knowledge we don't possess. Maybe our job isn't to control them but to support them in using their own capabilities. It was a radical departure from standard humanitarian practice, but Major Thompson was experienced enough to recognize that standard approaches weren't working. After consulting with his superiors via satellite phone, he agreed to let Sarah try her approach. The next morning, Sarah called a community meeting in the camp's central area. Instead of announcing what the relief authorities had decided to do, she presented the problem and asked for community solutions. "We're all facing a food shortage because the road is blocked," she said in her improving Nepali. "The soldiers and aid workers want to help, but we need your knowledge of mountain trails and your skills in organizing expeditions. This is your home, and you know it better than we do." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Representatives from different ethnic groups began discussing trail routes, load-carrying capabilities, and organizational systems. Instead of competing with each other for limited resources, they found themselves planning how to work together to solve a shared problem. Within hours, a complex operation was taking shape. Different groups took responsibility for different aspects of the mission: trail reconnaissance, pack animal management, supply distribution, and coordination with outside communities. Sarah's role shifted from organizer to facilitator, helping different groups communicate with each other and with the military command. Major Thompson was amazed at the efficiency of the community-organized operation. "Martinez, they've put together a logistics system in one day that would have taken us a week to plan and implement. And they're doing it with local resources and knowledge we didn't even know existed." Over the next 5 days, pack trains began arriving with food, medicine, and other essential supplies. The community had not only solved the immediate supply crisis but had also created new connections between their isolated valley and surrounding areas that would benefit them long after the relief operation ended. More importantly, the shared effort had created bonds between ethnic groups that were stronger than anything that had existed before the earthquake. When people work together to solve life and death problems, old prejudices and conflicts become less important than mutual survival and success. When the main road was finally cleared and regular supply lines resumed, the camp had transformed from a collection of desperate refugees into an organized community preparing to rebuild their homes and lives. The art festival resumed, but now it felt like a celebration of what they had accomplished together rather than a distraction from their problems. As the immediate crisis phase ended and people began returning to their reconstructed villages, Major Thompson asked Sarah to join him for a final debrief with the international relief leadership. "I want to document what happened here because it represents a fundamentally different approach to humanitarian operations," he began. "Instead of imposing solutions from outside, we supported the community in developing their own solutions. Instead of maintaining order through control, we built order through cooperation. And, instead of treating art and culture as luxuries, we used them as essential tools for community building and psychological healing." He looked at Sarah. "Martinez, your background in art therapy combined with your training in humanitarian operations allowed you to see possibilities that the rest of us missed. You understood that helping people preserve their cultural identity and build social connections was just as important as providing food and medical care." The relief operation in Nepal was considered so successful that Sarah was invited to present her methods at international conferences on humanitarian practice. Her approach, using art and cultural programming as tools for community resilience and cooperation, was adopted by several major relief organizations. But the recognition, while gratifying, wasn't what mattered most to Sarah. What mattered was that she had found a way to use all of her capabilities, artistic, organizational, empathetic, and analytical, in service of something meaningful. She had discovered that her failure in traditional military training hadn't been a judgment on her potential but simply evidence that she needed to find the right context for her unique combination of skills. 6 months after returning from Nepal, Sarah received a call that would define the next phase of her career. Colonel Baptiste, now a general with the UN peacekeeping force, had a proposition for her. Sarah, we're establishing a new unit focused on post-conflict community rebuilding. We need people who understand both the operational aspects of humanitarian work and the psychological and cultural factors that determine whether communities can heal and move forward. Based on your work in Haiti and Nepal, you're exactly what we're looking for. He paused. It would mean accepting a civilian leadership position with the UN, working directly with military commanders but maintaining your independence as a cultural and psychological specialist. You'd be designing and implementing community rebuilding programs in some of the most challenging environments in the world. Sarah didn't hesitate. General, I'm interested. Tell me more. As she listened to the details of the position, Sarah thought about her journey from the daughter who had disappointed her father by failing military training to the professional who was being recruited for her unique expertise. She had learned that success isn't about fitting into predetermined categories but about finding ways to use your authentic capabilities in service of something important. Her father had been right about the value of serving something bigger than yourself, but he had been wrong to assume that military service was the only way to do that. Sarah had found her own path to service, one that honored both her artistic nature and her desire to help others. When she called her parents that evening to tell them about the UN offer, her father's response surprised her with its emotion. Sarah, I am so proud of what you've become. When you failed that training program years ago, I was disappointed, but not in you. I was disappointed in myself for not understanding that there are many ways to serve and many ways to lead. You found your calling, and it's more important than anything I ever did in my military career. Her mother was crying with happiness. Sweetheart, you've proven that when you're doing what you're meant to do, nothing can stop you. Your art, your compassion, your intelligence, you found a way to use all of it to make the world better. 3 months later, Sarah Martinez began her new position as Director of Cultural Resilience Programs for the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations. Her first assignment would take her to a post-conflict zone in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where ethnic tensions threatened to reignite civil war despite a formal peace agreement. As her plane lifted off from New York, Sarah reflected on the unexpected path her life had taken. She had started as someone who failed military training, convinced that she lacked the courage and capability for meaningful service. She was now one of the youngest directors in UN peacekeeping, leading innovative programs that combined art therapy, cultural preservation, and community development in some of the world's most challenging environments. The little girl who had been afraid to disappoint her war hero father had become something she never could have imagined, a different kind of hero, one who fought battles with paintbrushes and built peace through understanding rather than force. But, perhaps most importantly, Sarah had learned that failure and success are often separated by nothing more than finding the right context for your authentic capabilities. She had not changed who she was fundamentally, she had simply found environments where her natural strengths could flourish and serve others. Her story had become proof that sometimes the people who fail the conventional tests are exactly the ones you need when it matters most, not because they learn to fit the conventional mold, but because they bring something different and essential that no one else can provide. When everything falls apart and traditional approaches aren't working, you need people who can see possibilities that others miss, who can build bridges where others see only divisions, and who understand that strength comes in many forms. Sarah Martinez had become that kind of person, not despite her early failures, but because of what those failures had taught her about finding her own unique path to service and meaning.